In today's video, I wanted to go through all of Lalatia Varian's quests for the Imperial cult featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Lalatia's quests are the only ones in the faction that require the player to be a certain rank. Varian only has 5 missions to give out, and while it's the least for any of the faction's quest givers, they're arguably some of the best that the cult has to offer. Plus, the rewards for this story arc are top tier compared to all of the others. Like the rest of the Imperial cult's leaders, Lalatia Varian can be found in the Imperial chapels. As it stands, she's one of the few members who's achieved the rank of Oracle. What's more, in order to even begin her set of quests, the player needs to have achieved the rank of Acolyte. Fortunately, that's only the 3rd rank in the faction, and it can easily be hit by just going through one of the guild's other storylines. Approaching Varian by the shrine and speaking with her, she opens by introducing herself. Lalatia's claim to fame is that she's been granted with visions. She can see glimpses of scenes all across Vvardenfell. However, she's no capable warrior, nor is she an adventurer. Her skill set is best used to scry, and she doesn't like to venture outside of Ebonheart. That's where I come in. Lalatia says that she has need of a bold adventurer, someone who's willing to dedicate themselves to the Oracle quests. Varian promises riches and rewards that befit a servant of the Nine. In order to begin with such adventures, Lalatia makes me swear an oath to her. I must do as she says and when she says it. Only then will she reveal her visions and sights. Swearing to dedicate myself to the cause, Varian expresses her gratitude and her warmest welcomes to the cult's inner circle. Getting into the first task, the Oracle says that she's had a vision regarding a ring in darkness. Inquiring further, the Imperial says that this is the Ring of the Wind, an ancient treasure of Elsewhere, a piece that's sacred to the divine Kinnereth. Her description is a little cryptic, but she says that she also saw fire glaring in a dwarf's face and darkness on a ring of water. Varian suggests that I seek the counsel of a Dunmer savant or a scout, as they may know the meaning of said vision. She specifically calls out Lalam Dreidel in the Grand Council chambers and Elassa Sarathrin at the Elven Nations Corner Club. Before the conversation ends, Lalatia hands me a few scrolls to help out with the journey ahead. The quest has barely started, and already it seems like there's more to it than most of the other cult's missions. I suppose there's a reason that the player needs to be a slightly higher rank in order to begin them, and let me tell you, that skill jump is certainly noticeable. As per the Oracle's advice, I sought out Dreidel in the council chambers in order to hear his opinion. The savant could be found on the 2nd floor of the fort, and speaking with him, he offered some decent insight on the Ring of the Wind. Lalam directed me to a place called Namu. It's a cavern in the wildlands of Sunagurudan, which is just west of the Daedric ruin Yansaramis. He says that there are several chambers in the cave that match the Oracle's vision. At the time, I assumed that both the scout and the savant would offer unique pieces of advice for my journey, so I went out of my way to find Elassa Sarathrin at the Elven Nations Corner Club. Unfortunately, it seems as though for now, their dialogue is the same, as she relayed the exact same information. However, that won't always be the case. Either way, with a lead and a destination marked on the map, I've made my way to the eastern side of Vvardenfell. Levitating past the Daedric ruins of Yansaramis and scanning the nearby cliffs, I managed to spot a small flat inlet. Having been around the block a few times, I figured that this is where I could find the entrance to Namu, and wouldn't you know it, I lucked out. Heading on inside, I was immediately spotted and aggroed onto by one of the cave's inhabitants. It turns out, Namu is home to a band of smugglers. There are 6 of them, and they range from level 9 all the way to level 16. They also have a variety of classes: archers, warriors, nightblades, battle mages, etc. As I've said in the past, it's always worth it to loot smuggler dens, as the treasures are not only valuable, but they can be incredibly useful as well. After some adventuring and battling, the pathway eventually leads to a peculiar area, a dim, circular chamber with water at its base. This was no doubt the Ring of Darkness that Lalatia saw. Following the narrow bridges and old staircases, I soon landed on the final smuggler, Galmus Dren. After defeating Dren in combat and checking his inventory, I finally came across the Ring of the Wind, an enchanted ring that fortifies the wearer's agility by 30 points. With the legendary artifact in my possession, it was time to leave this place. However, on my way out, I came across an even stranger sight. A lone NPC was wandering around the platforms, and he was not hostile. He was stripped of his belongings, minus his trousers and a pair of enchanted gloves. His name was John Hawker, and speaking with him, he claimed to be a trader and was separated from his caravan. Hawker took refuge in Namu, but that's when Galmasdren and his crew captured him and prepared him for the slave trade. He just wants to leave here, and in order to do so, he needs a scroll of divine intervention. Well, luckily for me, I just picked up a few from Varian at the start of this quest. Since I have the spell, I have no need for the scrolls. Handing one over, John thanked me profusely, and as a token of his gratitude, he gifted me all that he had left, his 2 enchanted gloves. Zenithar's warning demoralizes humanoids and creatures for 20 to 80 points for 10 seconds, silences for 10 seconds, and blinds for 5 to 25% on touch for another 10 seconds. Now, the other glove comes up as Xanthar's Wiles, which I imagine has to be a typo on the game's part. Regardless, Xanthar's Wiles charms the target for 1 to 50 points for 5 seconds. After a conversation, Hawker disappeared, seemingly using his scroll of divine intervention. Figuring it's time for me to leave too, I recall to Ebonheart and reported to Lalatia. Interestingly, I have the options of either telling her about John Hawker or keeping it to myself and saying nothing more. Choosing the former though, Varian becomes astonished. She connects the dots between the encounter and the gloves and believes that I had a run-in with an avatar of Zenithar himself. She calls it very peculiar, but then jumps back to the matter at hand. Varian's thrilled to hear about the Ring of the Wind's recovery, and in fact insists that I keep it for the journeys ahead. She tells me to speak with her again when I'm ready for the next mission, and with that, thus ends the quest, Ring in Darkness. Resuming my conversation with Varian, she gets right into the next Oracle quest. Lalatia mentions that she's been granted a prophecy for the boots of the Apostle. It's another coveted treasure, and it plays a great role in Cyrodiilic history. These are the boots that were once worn by Tiber Septim himself. Legend has it that as soon as Talos Stormcrown was finished with his training at High Hrothgar, he was seen floating down the mountain. It's believed that this was possible due to the boots. Through her vision, she heard this quote, "Through the doors of Berendis, within these silent caverns, beneath the wings of twilight, dust sleeps in the shoes that Talos wore." Beyond that, the priestess isn't sure what it means, and she suggests getting clarification from the savant or the scout once more. Doing so, I sought out Dreidel again, and he was very helpful with deciphering the prophecy. This Berendis she mentioned is an actual place. It's south of Nissus. As for the Wings of Twilight, Lalam believes that this is referring to Winged Twilights, the Daedric spawn that serve Azura. He believes that these creatures will be guarding the boots. I actually found this quest and its importance to be up there as one of my favorites. I'm genuinely fascinated by anything that has to do with Tiber Septim. Love him, hate him, like what he did for Tamriel, dislike his methods, whatever we may think, there's no denying that he's a central figure for the Elder Scrolls franchise. The Third Empire and a united Tamriel are often the backbones and underlying elements to these games' plots and universes. It's due to Tiber Septim that we have Uriel Septim. The conflicts between the Empire and the natives of Vardenfell are abundant all over Morrowind. Skyrim takes the Third Empire and puts them as one of the 2 warring factions within the land. I'll get back to the matter at hand now, but needless to say, Tiber Septim's lore, origins, and legacy will never not interest me. Reaching Nissus via Siltstrider and heading southwest, I landed on the stronghold of Berendis and went on inside. Berendis has 4 zones to it, and each one is patrolled by Daedric forces. These are certainly a level up from smugglers and spirits. However, the silver lining is that the loot they drop and the weapons they carry are most certainly an upgrade for lower level players. After a bit of adventuring and exploration, I soon landed on a doorway that led to the underground portion. Here, the stronghold leaked out into the earth and the Dunmer corridors turned into natural tunnels. After fighting my way through a handful more Daedra, I soon landed on a good sign, Winged Twilights. As the beasts flew at me from across the chamber, I could see that they were hovering over a corpse. What's more, the corpse had some eye-catching boots on. No doubt, those were the boots of the Apostle. Once the Harpies were defeated, I began wandering over to the corpse when all of a sudden, I noticed another point of interest. I could see a moving shadow on the ground just beside the dead body. While this is a minor bug, it revealed to me that there was a person standing on the platform above. So, first things first, I looked at the dead hero's inventory, and lo and behold, his shoes were the boots of the Apostle. When used, they give the wearer levitation for 30 to 40 points for 30 seconds on self. Hence, Tiber Septim riding the clouds as he descended from High Hrothgar. Now, the next thing was dealing with this strange NPC. Casting Levitate, I flew to the chamber ceiling and spotted a lone woman standing amongst some bones on one of the rocks. Speaking with her, her name was Amanin, and she was apparently dragged to this dungeon by the Winged Twilights and left stranded up here. She prayed to Mara for divine intervention, and similar to my encounter with John Hawker, I was able to give her one of my spare scrolls. Just before Amanin cast the spell, she gifted me Mara's skirt and blouse, the only items that she had left on her. The blouse grants the wearer with 10% magica resistance, and the skirt grants the wearer with 5 extra points of health. All finished up in Mirandus, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Lalatia. As a reward for my efforts and noble deeds, the Oracle allows me to keep the boots of the Apostle. She hopes that they continue to serve me while I carry out the will of the Nine. As for Amanin, Varian believes that she was an aspect of the goddess Mara. The divine wanted to test me and my faith. By passing said test, I was rewarded with her boons, similar to my encounter with Zenithar. Lalatia ends the conversation by saying that I should check in soon for my next assignment. With that, thus ends the quest, Boots of the Apostle. Resuming my conversation with Varian, she got right into my next task. This time, there wasn't any cryptic prophecy or mysterious vision. Lalatia spoke plain and simple. Another one of the cult's oracles, Adasamsi Asernararan, was sent to the Dunmer stronghold of Rothiran in hopes of recovering a relic called the Ice Blade of the Monarch. Varian believes that she was captured and that her life's in danger. She'd like me to head to Rothiran, which is in the southern region of Sheogorath, find Adasamsi, and recover the blade. According to further conversation, the blade's origins are quite interesting. It was created by an evil archmage known as Selmo of the Somerset Isles. Selmo gave the blade to a warrior named Thurgnar Assi in hopes that he'd use it to assassinate a king. Thurgnar tried, but was ultimately unsuccessful. The warrior died, Selmo was imprisoned, and the ice blade was recovered by some truly wicked people. According to legend, the blade is able to pass from owner to owner whenever it sees fit. Well, here's to hoping it wants to stay stashed away in my inventory. So far, I've really enjoyed my time going through Lalatia's quests. I found them to be fun and engaging. While standalone dungeon crawls and quick fetch quests aren't my favorite, the rewards have been really nice so far. Plus, the lore that accompanies each quest and item has been very intriguing. The Boots of the Apostle, the Ring of the Wind, Zenithar and Mara's boons all have relatively fascinating backstories, and it's interesting to think about what other things I'll encounter while out on this questline. Arriving at Dagon Fell, I levitated across the island and headed south towards the March stronghold. Soon, I landed at Rothiran and prepared myself for a battle. I could see some NPCs in the distance and thought for sure that they'd be hostile. Surprisingly though, they weren't. At this point, I was a little stumped as to what I was walking into. Either way, I cased the dungeon and landed on a doorway that led into the arena. Curious, I went on through, and that's when the fighting had started. There were several hostile NPCs down here. All 6 of them were Dunmer, their levels ranged from 6 to 15, and their classes were varied: sorcerers, bards, and witch hunters. Among them was an NPC named Laren Tirano. Tirano was the current owner of the Ice Blade of the Monarch, or rather the previous owner. It's a long 2-handed sword, can deal a max of 50 base damage, and has the enchantment of frost damage for 10 to 40 points for 1 second per hit. Interestingly, on Laren's person, he also had Adasamsi's robe, which paralyzes the target for 5 seconds, her ring, which grants the user with divine intervention, and a key to some slave cells. Once all of the threats were eliminated, I began opening the nearby cells in search of Adasamsi. Checking each one, I managed to locate the Oracle in the western room. Speaking with Adasamsi, she pleaded with me to free her. Laren Tirano, the Ice Blade's previous owner, was the one who orchestrated this whole thing. She believes that Tirano brainwashed her into forgetting how she got here, as the last thing she remembered was waking up in the cell stripped of all her clothes. Adasamsi asks me to bring her ring, as casting divine intervention is the fastest way out of here. Well, backing out of the conversation and reinitiating it, the Oracle takes the ring that I had already picked up and thanks me profusely. In an instant, Adasamsi is gone and my work here is done. Before leaving, I decided to do my good deed for the day. The arena was filled with captive slaves. Locating the slaver's key, I used it to unlock their bracers and set them free. Hopefully that puts some good karma on my ticket. Now, I did do my due diligence and search the rest of Rothiran for any possible divine avatars or godly aspects. Unfortunately, there was nobody of the sort around these parts. So, recalling to the Imperial chapels, I reported to Lalatia. Apparently, Adasamsi had already checked in, and she told Varian about all my deeds and accomplishments. As a reward, the Imperial let me keep the Ice Blade. With that, thus ends the quest, Ice Blade of the Monarch. Speaking again with Elatia, she gives me my next assignment. Again, she puts away the riddles and poems and talks plainly. Apparently, one of the cult's members, Urjorad, left on a mission to defeat an evil sorcerer named Caraselmo. The healer took a powerful artifact with him called the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting. Through her visions, Varian has seen that great misfortune has come to Urjorad, meaning he could be captured or dead. The Oracle would like me to venture to the Daedric ruins of Ashal Mimikala and recover the scroll. While it's not necessary, she calls it a bonus if I'm able to slay Caraselmo and his bodyguard Meriarin. According to further conversation with Varian, she says that Urjorad was the apprentice of someone named Drofarin Stiffneck, another healer in the Imperial cult. Stiffneck was actually slain by Caraselmo, and Urjorad's mission was fueled by vengeance. However, even with the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting, everyone knew that he didn't stand a chance against Caraselmo and Meriarin. As for Caraselmo himself, his lore is just as interesting. The High Elf served in the court of Uriel Septim V. Back then, he was an honored member of the Empire. However, fast forward to the events of the Elder Scrolls Arena, apparently Caraselmo was implicated in Jagartharn's plot to overthrow the Emperor. Ever since then, both High Elves, Meriarin, and his master have been on the run. Since Caraselmo is a servant of Mehrunes Dagon, he's hiding out in Ashal Mimikala, the Daedric ruin that holds the shrine of the Prince of Destruction. I find it very interesting that this quest and the last one both had servants of Mehrunes Dagon as their main antagonists. My mind jumps to possible breadcrumbs and allusions to Dagon playing a part in the events of the next installment. Furthermore, it's interesting that Caraselmo aided Jagarthorn during the Elder Scrolls Arena, because, according to several sources, it's believed that Jagartharn was meant to play a role in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Again, it just makes you wonder that if that was the case, then this could have been a possible reference to a cut version of the Elder Scrolls IV. In any case, tangent aside, if the ruins of Ashal Mimikala sound familiar, that's because this would make for the third quest that's used its dungeons for content. Not only is Mehrunes Dagon's shrine here, but Caraselmo, the target for this quest, carries an artifact belonging to the Morag Tong and their questline. It's definitely a jam-packed ruin. Ashal Mimikala is located west of Hlormarin and south of Narmok. Its exterior is guarded by Daedra and cultists, and its interior is no different. Pretty much right away, I came across Meriarin and a Dremora Lord. Meriarin is a level 18 knight, and even though he only fights with a steel sword, he can prove to be a rather deadly opponent. What's more, Dremora Lords are some of the most difficult Daedric enemies that the player can face. They can cast powerful spells and wield mighty weapons. Together, Meriarin and the Lord did a number on my health, and it was some of the closest fighting that I've had so far. Once they were defeated, I continued to make my way through the shrine and very quickly ran into Caraselmo. The Altmer Mage is level 22, and if you let him get his casts off, he could prove to be a real problem. Paralysis, burden, powerful destruction spells, poisons, it can prove to be a deadly encounter. Defeating Caraselmo was satisfying, but it was only one half of the quest, and it was the optional part. Searching around for Urjorad, I eventually found him in the upper levels of the shrine. Unfortunately, Lelatia's vision was correct. The Khajiit had fallen into misfortune, aka he too was slain like his master. On his person, he had the Divine Staff of Judgment. This weapon damages the target's strength and endurance for 5 to 12 points each for 1 second. He also had the Chameleon Ring, which grants the user with Chameleon for 10% for 10 seconds on self. As for the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting, it was placed on one of the stones near Urjorad's corpse, showing that he was never even able to cast it. The scroll makes the target weak to fire damage by 18 to 81% for 5 seconds and deals anywhere from 18 to 81 points of fire damage for another 5 seconds. This certainly could have done the trick on Caraselmo if Urjorad was able to let it off. In any case, once everything was wrapped up here, I recalled to Ebonheart and reported to Varian. The Imperial acknowledged that I was able to avenge both the student and his master by slaying the High Elves. As a reward for my efforts, Lelatia gifted me the left and right gauntlets of glory, and she let me keep the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting. The left gauntlet fortifies the user's unarmored skill for 10 points for 120 seconds, and the right gauntlet fortifies hand-to-hand skill for 10 points for another 120 seconds as well. With that, thus ends the quest, the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting. Chatting with Lalatia again, she had one final quest for me. However, before getting into it, I figured I was long overdue for some advancements. Checking for promotions, I rose from the rank of Disciple to Oracle, becoming an equal to Varian. With the advancement came a reward. I was gifted Akatosh's ring. This piece of jewelry fortifies conjuration, mysticism, restoration, and enchant all by 10 points for 60 seconds. After that, I was able to rise to the ranks of Invoker, Theurgist, and finally Primate. Primate made me chuckle a bit. I thought it was a little odd to name the top of the class cultists after a category of mammals. Primate is the final rank for the Imperial cult, and there isn't a single person on Vardenfell who matches it. Meaning, I'm now the highest ranking member of the faction, and technically in charge of this whole operation, but no one really acknowledges it, so it doesn't mean much. In any case, with that achievement out of the way, I got into the final assignment for the Oracle quests. Lalatia starts off by saying that she's had a vision of Skullcrusher, another legendary artifact. She then goes into the lore of the weapon. Skullcrusher was created by the smith Hilbongard and his enchanter Dorak Gusal during the captivity of Skyrim. The hammer is extremely light, yet it's able to pack an incredible punch. The weapon was lost to thievery, as a group of bandits was able to snatch it from a festival. However, Skullcrusher has a very unique power. Legend has it that it's able to leave any unlawful owner's possession and return to its maker's worksite. Scholars and historians believe that Hilbongard and Dorak forged the hammer here on Vardenfell. It was done in some Daedric ruin, but no one knows which one exactly. Luckily for the cult, Lalatia's had a vision of Skullcrusher. She's seen it buried deep within the earth. It is at a Daedric ruin, and Varian can see that the forge uses molten lava as its heat source, which could help narrow it down to a few sites. However, said Daedric ruin has sunk below the surface, and all of its entrances have been sealed off. Again, luckily for the cult, Varian has seen another way in. Apparently, there's a secret entrance to the ruin through, quote, the halls of the dead. The priestess just doesn't know the specifics on which dungeons connect and where to go. For that, she tells me to speak with the savant or the scout. If I manage to find Skullcrusher, Varian believes that I should keep it. She just would like to deconsecrate its enchantment so that way it doesn't Mjolnir its way back to the forge. Remember a while back when I mentioned that eventually the Dunmer Savant and Dark Elf Scouts would offer different pieces of information? Well, it finally happened, and it sort of bit me in the back here. Speaking with Lalum Dreidel for the last time, I brought up the Halls of the Dead. Dreidel related it back to the Dunmer ancestral tombs, which of course are littered all around Vardenfell. However, he isn't quite sure which one it could be, as plenty of them have gone unexplored. At this point, I was starting to think I'd have to stick my neck into every single crypt in search of some secret entrance, but I was holding out hope that Nalasa Serathrin could help me out here. Heading to Vivek and chatting with her, I asked about the Halls of the Dead too, and unfortunately, no dice. She said that I should speak with a savant on this matter, as they know riddles and prophecies better than scouts. Bringing up Skullcrusher, again, Nalasa said to check in with Dreidel for that one. Stumped, my heart sank and I was getting ready to make the Great Burial Ground circuit of Vardenfell. However, I wanted to try dialogue with each NPC one more time, specifically Serathrin, as she had way more dialogue options than Lalum. Lo and behold, buried under all of her standard prompts, I found the topic of sealed Daedric ruins, something that Dreidel didn't have. When asked about them, Serathrin said that Anidnabia might be the site I'm looking for. It's near Sadrith Mora and it was sealed by rockfall during the First Era. While she can't say with certainty that it has pools of lava within it, many Daedric ruins do, so it could be my best bet. Sounding good enough for me, as a lead's a lead, I began making my way to the eastern side of the island. Since Nalasa didn't mention where Anidnabia was in relation to Sadrith Mora, she just said that it was close by, I assumed that the ruin was somewhere northeast of the Telvanni village. Booking it past the Wolverine Hall, Anidnabia ended up being directly east of Sadrith Mora, and very close to the Imperial fort. Stepping foot on its grounds, I fought my way through a couple of Daedra and located the sealed entrance. To be honest, I forgot that I had to get in through an ancestral tomb, so for a split second I was scratching my head. Nevertheless, I took this opportunity to confirm this spot as the right dungeon, at least that's what I told myself, and then started to look for a crypt. Fortunately, I didn't have to look for very long. Northeast of the ruin, pretty much right beside it, was the Omeran ancestral tomb. Heading on inside, this crypt was guarded by Daedra, which isn't unheard of, but it's not that common either. Again, just another tip-off that I was likely in the right place. The actual tomb itself doesn't have very amazing loot, but the items you can pick off of the fallen Daedra are valuable and powerful. Not long into the adventure, I stumbled into a side room that had one of its walls blasted open. This led me to some natural tunnels, which in turn spat me out by the buried entrance of Adenabia. This chamber was pretty big, and it had multiple levels to it which could have probably been explored. Very clearly seeing the doorway to the ruins though, that was solely what I focused on. Wouldn't you know it too, it was plated as the Forge of Hilbongard. Going on inside, the first thing I noticed was a scroll of Windwalker. This granted me with the ability to levitate for 500 points for 60 seconds, as well as invisibility for another 60 seconds. Taking this as a nudge, I grabbed the scroll and held onto it while I did a bit of my own magic here. For the most part, the only enemies in this section of Adenabia were Atronachs. A Frosty guarded the door to the actual forge itself, and inside the smithy there was a lone fire Atronach. The forge was filled with a bunch of interesting treasures like enchanted gear, skill books, and repair hammers. Again, there was another consumable for levitate on one of the workbenches, so at this point, I figured my best bet was to look up for Skullcrusher. At the center of the zone, there was a circular pit that contained a small ledge. On said ledge, there was an anvil, an altar, and a Grandmaster's hammer. Having never seen one of these before, I mistakenly thought it was Skullcrusher, but quickly realized that that's not the case. I guess it was just added there to show how skilled Hilbongard was at his craft. Instead, Skullcrusher was located in a floating chest just above the molten pit. The hammer was one-handed, dealt a max of 60 base damage, had a weight of 15, and had the enchantments of Feather for 15 points and Fortify Attack for 5 points. While my character isn't proficient with blunt weapons, I'm pretty sure Skullcrusher would give my Daedric Daikatana a run for its money. With the artifact in hand, I was ready to leave this place. Recalling to Ebonheart, I reported to Lalatia Varian for the final time. The priestess said that she couldn't detect any sort of evil magic or curse on the hammer, meaning it won't leave my inventory. In hopes that I continue my service to the Nine, Varian gives me the ring, Foe Grinder. She finished by saying that that's all the quests she has for me. If she needs my help again, she'll ask one of the other higher-ranking members to relay the information. Spoiler alert, but that never happens. Foe Grinder is an enchanted ring that fortifies blunt for 20 points for 120 seconds, essentially making Skullcrusher even more OP. At this point, no matter who I talk to, they all say that if any more work comes up, they'll send word. But like I said, that doesn't happen, and that's it for the Imperial cult quests. There are no more advancements or assignments. Even the highest ranking member of the faction, or I guess at this point, the second highest, the Invoker, Ruchia Kunitian, doesn't have anything to add on. So with that, thus ends the quest, Skullcrusher, that wraps up Lalatia Varian's storyline, and that finishes up the Imperial cult's questline as a whole. I enjoyed Lalatia's quests. I found them to be very entertaining, informative, and they didn't, quote, waste my time. What I mean by that is that every quest had some sort of significance to it. Whether there was lore, a decent reward, or a continuation of the story, it all felt concise and easy to follow. I think it was nice too that there were only 5 Oracle quests. More than 6, and I feel like it would have started to drag on a bit. As I've already said, my favorite was probably the Boots of the Apostle, as Tiber Septim's lore will never not fascinate me. As for my least favorite, to be honest I wouldn't really say I had one, but maybe the Ice Blade of the Monarch. It just felt like it had the least to offer in terms of background information and lore. But if the other quests were 9 out of 10s, that one was like an 8, I still enjoyed it. Overall, I'd tie Euless Trupter's story arc with Lalatia Varian's in terms of which quests I liked the most. Euless's were pretty unique in the sense that they were all about schmoozing up to the right people, and I personally love that sort of thing in the Elder Scrolls. However, they weren't very lore heavy. In terms of least favorite, it would probably have to be Sinolian Tuniphus's. His quests were just too simple. I understand that they're aimed at lower level players, but to me, you can see the skill jump from Euless, Lalatia's, and even Kay's. K's were pretty easy too, and there weren't that many of them, but I suppose they offered more of a challenge than killing a netch and collecting ingredients. Thank you everybody for coming on this journey with me. I'd love to know your thoughts on Lalatia's quests down below, as well as the Imperial cult storyline as a whole. Until next time, keep on adventuring.